Hello, and welcome to Waves of YA, a podcast focused on young adult literacy, brought to you by the Ocean County Library's Teen Literacy Workgroup.
Hello, welcome to Waves of YA. My name is Summer, and I am the librarian at the Long Beach Island Library.
I'm Cecilia. I'm the Teen Services Librarian at the Lacey Branch.
And I'm Chris. I'm the branch manager at the Island Heights Branch.
Today we are going to be talking about young adult graphic novels. Who would like to start off with our first question?
I'll start. What subgenre of graphic novel do you most gravitate towards or enjoy the most?
I feel like I've always gravitated towards fantasy in most books, but I do like when they combine, like when you have fantasy or sci-fi, but there's also like a little romance sprinkled in. My favorite graphic novel I read this past year was The Infinity Particle by Wendy Zhu, which combines sci-fi and romance really nicely. It features a human girl who goes to Mars to work in a robotics lab and a robot boy named Kai. Oh, the girl's name is Clementine, which I love. Clementine and Kai. And they have a little romance. There's also a little bit of a mystery. There's also a little bit of a mystery involved. So I guess I really like when genres combine, when there's more than one genre in a book.
I was going through my Goodreads when we chose this question, and the number of sports graphic novel and manga I read is hysterical because I'm like, it's not that many. And I'm like, oh, it's like half of them.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, and it doesn't help that like all the LGBT ones are like this neon pink and like purple. And I'm like, ooh, these are my favorite colors. So they like pop out more to me anyway, where I'm like, I like this color. It's pretty.
Was there one recently that was about football and it was pink?
Yes. And I can't remember the title of it.
Bell of the Ball?
No, that was soccer. I think it's soccer. Actually, I'm in the middle of reading Bell of the Ball. There's a soccer ball on the cover. We don't know what sport Chloe plays. I'm like halfway through the book or quarter of the way through the book.
Because I thought that one was interesting because instead of the normal black, white, and gray, it was different shades of pink as the base tone, which was super cute.
That's why I picked it, because I was like, it's neon pink.
Nice.
I'm going to read it. And then there's a Grand Slam romance, which is also neon pink, sports LGBT romance as well. But yeah, I'm like, oh, sports romance, great. And then like for like more actiony, fighty stuff instead. Those two are like my top two picks normally.
It's fun looking back. You have this thought in your head of like, these are the kind of books I read. And then you look back on what you've actually read and you're like,
Yes.
oh, I read a lot of this actually.
Yes.
And what about you, Cecilia?
I tend to gravitate more towards science fiction when I read graphic novels. I think it's just because I'm attracted to like the neon colors and the dark shades. I also like supernatural and fantasy, any kind of cozy cottagecore sort of read because those have pastel colors. I think I'm more of gravitating towards the color and the story. Anything Kay O'Neill has written, they have written Princess Ever After, the Tea Dragon Society.
I love the Tea Dragons.
They're great.
They're so calming to read about. I just felt like relaxed when I read the Tea Dragon books.
That's why I picked up The Baker and the Bard, because it reminded me of Kay O'Neill. It literally says a cozy fantasy adventure on the cover. I'm like, sold. I'm there.
That is nice. Next question. In the past, graphic novels have often been considered, in air quotes, not real reading, or have been valued less than printed books. How do you think that has changed over time, and what are the benefits of reading graphic novels?
I think it's changed because we're seeing a lot, and this folds into the next question, of turning prose books or classics into graphic novels so they're more accessible to everyone. So publishing companies are seeing them as acceptable reading because they're transforming the works. There is the manga retellings of Frankenstein and Anne of Green Gables that we have that are word for word what is written in the novels. The other reason, I think your brain is working more when you're looking at graphic novels too, because you're looking at the body language of the character and the expression on the character's face. And your eyes are moving more and trying to see what exactly the characters are doing, or like what's happening in the background that's giving you context clues to what's happening with the characters or the scenery. And we've talked a lot about, well, I've talked a lot about colors. I'm imagining we're going to talk about more colors, but why certain colors are used whether it's black and white for flashbacks or Belle of the Ball we were talking about, they used exclusively pinks or other things, why those colors were chosen and what colors say about the story as well.
They can portray the tone. You were saying like the cozy books have lighter, more pastels, or I think often very warm tones too. Whereas a horror manga might have more dark colors. Like I'm thinking the book Squad by Maggie Tokuda Hall, like
Love her.
are a lot of dark tones and brights, like neon brights, but then also a lot of really dark tones because it is a horror, but it's also campy. So I think that's a good
Yeah.
example. I also think that with graphic novels, art can be a very visual thing. And I think sometimes visual aspects can hold our attention more, especially if you're having trouble focusing or you are just someone who's very stimulated by visual effects. I always joke that I like horror movies, but I only like horror movies if it's very visually stimulating, which is why I like Guillermo del Toro's horror movies, but I wouldn't really say I like a lot of really gory stuff. I love Wes Anderson movies for the same reason. I really appreciate the visual aspect of it. And the same could be said for, I think, a lot of comic book and graphic novel readers as well.
One of my favorite visuals of a graphic novel that will get me to read it more is if there's food in it.
Mm,
If they're opening a bakery or they're barista or they're cooking of some kind, yeah, I will look at pictures of food.
I also work with children and therefore parents. So I've had this conversation with parents that are like, my kid's just reading Dogman or just reading Rain and Telgemere. There's normally like a stepping stone where it's a big gap between like I'm reading with my parents a picture book to like reading a chapter book. And there's like the beginning readers, but there still needs to be like something between these stages. And graphic novels fill that because it is more words. They're normally more complicated words because like they can look at the pictures, but it's not nothing but text. So it's a gateway book into harder books.
yeah.
Of being able to fill that gap in of like, oh, it's really a lot to read. It feels intimidating, where it's less intimidating. We're like, well, there's pictures still. And also, one of the things I talk about is visual literacy, especially with computers, tablets, cell phones. We're no longer on that black screen with green text, which I don't even think any of us are like really old enough to remember that anymore. When you're on your computer, it's an icon. Like, I know that blue square with a white W is the word app. You know what the visual is. It's all shorthand, it's all images, it's not all text anymore. So like being able to see it, and like we learn for generations from a very early age, red octagon is stop. It doesn't need to have it. If you see that, you stop. We know. We know stop, we know look both ways before we cross the road. So being able to read graphic novels helps with that addition of like being able to navigate through your phone where there's no text. It's like you need to know like this arrow means forward, this arrow means back, all that shorthand that gets used on those smaller screens because that's the world we live in. So like graphic novels, the kids know how to use the phones, the tablets, they know how to read it, which is why I think kids also have an easier time adapting and embracing graphic novels compared to adults that grew up with much less visual things. Or it's like it's comic books and it's Superman. And it's like it's not anymore. Like they still exist. There's still this long like I have to go to the comic shop every week to get my new volume. But there's also just like a self-contained story of beginning, middle, end, one book. You get in, you read it, you finish.
Yeah, and I think that the distinction between comics and graphic novels is so slim now because most comics, even the old Golden Age comics, are bound together now in omnibuses. And I can't speak to how comics were received back in the day because I wasn't there, but I do think they weren't taken as seriously. But also just take X-Men and how that's affected pop culture over the course of time. And heck, Marvel is the biggest franchise out there right now. And going off what you were saying, Chris, about parents being, and I understand why they're skeptical because they just want to make sure that their kids are on the right path with reading. There are a lot of graphic novels that are considered classics of literature, like just take, for example, Mouse or
Right.
Persepolis.
Sandman.
And what?
The Sandman
Oh,
by Neil
Sandman,
Oh,
Gaiman.
yeah.
Sandman.
They changed the qualifications for an award because people got mad that Sandman was able to win it.
Heh. Well, Neil
Yeah.
Gaiman can do anything, really.
Yeah.
And even the Neil Gaiman's books like The Graveyard Book and Coraline have
Yeah.
graphic novel versions as well. So it's not black and white, haha, comic pun. It depends on what you're reading and what you like to read more than anything, I guess. Sorry, I'm just rambling now.
And there's so many nonfiction graphic novels that are coming out too.
Yeah,
Whether
there
they're
was
memoirs or nonfiction.
Yeah. Sorry, speaking
Generally.
of food, there was one that came out
Yeah.
recently. I think it's called Yummy,
Yes.
and it's about the history of food, but it's a graphic novel. And I was like, oh, Cecilia was just talking about food in graphic novels. Okay, what's our next question?
There has been a trend of turning classic novels or printed fiction in general into graphic novel form. Do you have a favorite example of this? And how do you think printed fiction translates into this new format?
Well, I know that there is the manga classics series. I have a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo in manga format, which I really think is cool because that's one of a book I really like a lot. And I think it's great because when I originally read Pride and Prejudice, I understood what was happening. And this was like years and years ago. I understood what was happening. But then after I watched the movie, I understood it a little better because it doesn't dumb it down, but it presents it in a slightly more palatable format because they're discussing it in a way that's a little more accessible to someone who didn't live during the time they were writing it. And so I feel like, say you read the Pride and Prejudice manga, and then you read the original book, you're like, oh, I can visualize what's going on better, if that makes sense.
I realized going through like my list, I've read more recent things as both a text and graphic novel version. Neil Peart from Rush wrote Clockwork Angels, which is also one of their albums, as a novel with somebody and then turned into their concept album. And then it also had a graphic novel adaptation. So reading the book, I was catching all the fun references to other Rush songs when I was reading it. And then seeing the graphic novel, those like fun little like Easter egg references weren't in it as much, but the illustrations were really cool and like really added depth to this steampunk world that he created. So like I did enjoy both formats for it and also the album as well. But it was interesting seeing like what they adapted, what they changed, and like you don't need the fun Easter eggs of like song lyrics as some of the dialogue and stuff, but like it was cool having it and then seeing what they took out, what they changed. And also because it's a different format, seeing what they prioritize and how they tweaked the different format. But most of the stuff I read is like a retelling of a classic. I just read North Ranger, which is a retelling of Northanger Abbey. So I was like,
cool.
yeah, I was like, ooh, it's the spooky one making fun of Gothic fiction.
Did not realize that.
Yeah, I was like, why does North Ranger sound like familiar but not quite right? And I like flipped it over and like the author was like explaining it. And I was like, oh, I get it. I keep up with the Boom versions of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's going from TV show to graphic novel and seeing how they're changing it to like make it more modern.
Yeah. Is that the one that they kind of consider season 8?
No, season 8.
No.
I also have season 8 on here too.
Yeah. I think that
season-
one's a retelling of
Yeah.
the classic stories.
Oh, I do.
but set in the modern universe.
I have the
A
first.
modern world.
I think I have the first one of that, the first volume.
I have.
They
all
also
of
did
them.
the last Vampire Slayer, I think, too, which is set further in the future
Yes.
with Buffy in her 40s, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Like,
I
there's
thought-
so many.
Oh, I thought that one was part of the season 8 one.
No. Season 8 was published by Dark Horse Comics.
And then I think
Okay.
they went to season like 10 or something like that.
Yeah, it was like 10, and
the
you could
whole thing.
you could see the funding going down in the artwork of like season 8 looks really good, and then like by season 10 they are busted looking of
Oh,
like
wow.
Yeah.
oh we
I
got no
actually-
money.
Yeah, I
Got
never read
it.
the comics for that because I was like, I'd have to buy like a huge omnibus and it would be so hard to hold.
If you want to borrow them, I can send them to you. I have them.
I also like how stuff like Marvel and DC, which DC is Dark Horse Comics, right?
No, DC
It's
is
not?
Detective Comics. Dark Horse is different.
Oh, I
Yeah,
get them
they're-
confused. But I do like how in those like worlds, it's sort of like canon that like all the characters exist in the same world. So like Neil Gaiman, I think in Sandman, he meets characters from the DC universe.
Yeah, like Constantine and
Yeah. And or like you said, Dark Horse is Buffy. So actually, I think Hellboy is also Dark Horse.
Hellboy
Yes.
is Dark Horse.
So
yeah.
Hellboy
Yeah.
and Buffy could team up. That's canon. It could happen.
Now I want that.
I do
Yeah,
too. It'd be so much fun.
Now I
I
want
love
Guillermo del
Hellboy.
Toro retelling of Buffy.
Guillermo del Toro
Oh.
could do Buffy so well.
Yes.
I love Guillermo del Toro. That's the whole thing with like the Hellboy movie. I watched it with my partner and he was sort of like, it's very cheesy. He didn't love the script. And I was like, I don't really care about the cheesiness because I'm here for the aesthetic that Guillermo
For the
del Toro
monsters.
brings. My only thing was canonically Hellboy wear short shorts and they didn't make Ron Perlman wear short shorts.
Oh.
So
And he would have.
he
Like,
would have. But I love Hellboy. Such a fun character.
I was going to also talk about IPs that are in graphic novels because I think those are stepping stones too. Like someone who's watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, there was a ton of Avatar books.
So
in
wait,
graphic
IP, what's
novels.
IP?
Intellectual properties.
And okay, thank you.
So like TV shows like Avatar or Dune. Dune has prequel graphic novels. Critical Role has graphic novels now for backstories of the characters that they do in the show. Buffy, which we talked about, all kinds of TV shows and stuff. And I think that gets kids interested too. Are there Five Nights at Freddy's graphic novels? I know there's
I think
books.
so. And there's like
so much
Minecraft
books.
graphic
There's
novels.
anything there's like, oh, I know where that thing is. I can read this as a graphic novel. And then like, oh, here's some books too, and here's some other things.
I find interesting also, and I mean, Disney's going Disney, but the opposite trend of like, there is 8 billion, and like DC's really good about having like the novelizations. Because I'm like, okay, what Batman arc do you want to read? Which one? Like, which universe? Who's the all like? It's so splintered because it's got so much back catalog where like it can be overwhelming and daunting to be like, well, I want to read. Like, do I start from number 1? What arc should I go for? I don't know. I like the Batman comic, or I liked the Batman cartoon from the 80s and 90s. Where do I go from there? And like, they have the novelizations of like, hey, this relates to the newest form of Batman. And like, hey, we've got a Catwoman by, is it Sarah J. Maas?
Yes.
I think so.
Yes. So, hey, like, you like
DC
Catwoman.
icons.
Yeah, like DC icons and like stuff like that. Like, you know these characters. And the back catalog is deeply overwhelming. Here, just read a novel. And then it's like, you're already reading the comics. Now read a novel. Check out this other novel that's similar to this, of like, it kind of, the road goes both ways.
They've spun off the DC icons into graphic novels too. Like those verse novels are now graphic novels or something set in that universe.
It can be very overwhelming. Like if I wanted to start reading X-Men comics, I wouldn't know where to start. I would feel very intimidated.
You mostly just pick a storyline that you want and jump in feet first.
I guess so. That's true.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same with like, you know, the Terry Pratchett books.
Discworld has a million books.
Yeah,
a million, and like,
you kind of have to. And usually you can find like a map online somewhere about these are the different story arcs within Discworld. So I guess it's kind of similar for different comic series.
Why I haven't read Discworld either. I'm like, I've read like all
If
the
you
death,
wanna-
like death ones.
I was gonna say if you want to read Discworld, you start with either Death or like The Witches.
Yeah.
Those are 2 of the most popular. Or I read Pyramids, which takes place in Discworld's version of Egypt, and that's one that was really funny. These aren't graphic novels, we're off topic, but it reminded me of them. Yeah.
There's going to be a graphic novel of Good Omens.
Of course there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's through a Kickstarter, so
Yeah.
I don't know how accessible
like,
it's going to be for like libraries and stuff.
I get
but
so hipstery about Good Omens because one of my favorite books long before the show came out, and how I'm like, everyone likes Good Omens now. Guess it's popular all of a sudden. Wah, wah, wah. That's me. I liked it first, guys.
I don't know, I read it in college.
Yeah.
So
Not first, you know, I'm like joking, but
pull up the Goodreads, see who read it first.
no, I know. I joke that I get like hipster about stuff where I'm just like, I liked it first. I'm the OG.
Oh, I definitely am like very much like that about like certain things. And I'm like, oh, this is the thing I'm pretentious about. Oh no.
So what styles of graphic novels appeal to you the most? Is there something that you gravitate towards?
I really like things that have a limited color palette. So we mentioned Belle of the Ball with all pink. The Hungry Ghost, I can't remember the author's name, something
Victoria Ying.
Victoria Ying. So like she only uses 4 colors. It's white, this sad peach. If you see it, you'll understand, because there's like happy peach and then there's sad. It's got cool tones in it. this grayish purple cool tone and a sad mint green, again, like a cool tone green. It's a sad book, and I really liked that the colors were so muted, sticking with how sad the book was. And then also, because it's only 4 colors, decisions have to be made pretty like critically of like, how are you coloring things? Are they going to clash? Or is it going to turn into one background blob of nothingness? So I like that she like had to think pretty critically about how she's coloring it, and like the color palette matched the tone. Whereas Belle the Ball is neon pinks and it's pretty fun. It's like high school drama and like very Mean Girls at some points. Of like, oh, Gina's gonna be pulling some like Regina George nonsense pretty much from the get-go. And it's neon pink. You're like, yeah, Wednesdays we were pink.
Love it. I think I gravitate towards really intricate designs. And that's not to say like I won't read something that isn't, but I think especially if I'm considering buying a graphic novel, because graphic novels are expensive, I want it to be like really vibrant and beautiful and rich. And that doesn't just mean the color, I mean the design itself. And I feel like it's so personal. It's hard to describe. I might pick up a book and look inside and be like, oh, I don't really like this style, but I can't describe why. So like even though I love Neil Gaiman's Sandman comics, I wouldn't say I love the art. I like it, but some of it's not my taste.
Jagged. I feel like it's
It
really
is, yeah.
jagged, and sometimes it's hard to follow the lines. But the story is like dark and jagged,
Yeah.
so it kind of, I feel like that
It
emphasizes
fits, yeah.
what's happening.
Kind of connect with the art style, the dialogue and the story.
Yeah.
Oh,
so like,
definitely, yeah. It fits. It's just sort of you have to be like, is the story good enough to support me not loving the art style, which it is.
part of the stuff I have an issue with, like, I just feel bored looking at it, or like Raina Telgemeier blew up and like good for her. Like she wrote a couple stories that were very like personal, related to her life, partnered with Anne Martin. And then I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's trying to be Raina Telgemeier, like that very cartoony, like, and I'm like, do something interesting. It's art.
Yeah.
Put your stamp on it. Cecilia had mentioned earlier, like different body types. I feel like some artists fall into like, we've got one body type and a different hair color. Good luck. And especially like with some manga recently, where I'm like, no, it is a visual medium. Do something interesting. I want to like name that Pokemon your silhouette. I need no details. I need an outline. I want to be able to identify it. Let's go.
And I feel like with manga especially, there are certain beauty standards in Japan where the manga is coming from, and that translates to manga very easily.
It does, but like there's our older stuff that has come in. Like I was read Cross Manage, which is a lacrosse. It's a sports manga, and like it was from 2015, and everyone had the different body types. The twins had the same body shape and their pigtails on the opposite side because they were twins. But one girl was super tall, one girl was like short and like round, and like different body types. And you're like, okay, I know which character that is, even if it was like just an outline.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like now, like it's leaning more into like a standard, like beauty standard. I'm like, you didn't do this the whole time. Let's go back to that.
And that wasn't me just saying like, oh, we can write it off because it's a different culture. I was more just being like, I feel like that is something that's a little typical, but we still should be trying to grow from it.
Yeah. And it's not like everything either, because Sakamoto Days, that author, has a bunch of different characters, a bunch of different body types doing all different things. So like there is still plenty of stuff that's coming through with different styles going on, and like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, you could spot from a mile away through several layers of fuzzy glass and be like, yeah, that's JoJo's. Like, we know that character style. I like a distinct style. Like, the Sailor Moon characters in the original manga are all like very stretched out, and like that is the style. Like,
yeah, which I think I did hear somewhere that the author did want to make Usagi a little chubbier in the original, but either it was too much of a risk to take with how things were received then, or I forget if she wasn't allowed, or she just decided not to take the risk. But I do know she wanted to do a little more with Usagi's body type, but didn't for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I do think the beauty standard in manga does leave room for interesting subversion of it. One of my favorite shoujo mangas and animes is My Love Story. For anyone listening, it's this guy. He is a 15-year-old boy, but he is one of those kids that has a growth spurt really early. So he kind of looks like a grown man, and he's just very tall, very muscular, has very strong features. And, you know, like the beauty standard for like guys in Japan is kind of like to be very like kind of beautiful. And he just doesn't really fit that. but he has the biggest heart and he's such a good person. And he meets this girl who's this really cute little girl, who's the same age as him. She's not actually a little girl. And she thinks he's really attractive. It's not one of those things where like she has to be like, oh, he's not attractive, but he's a good personality. Like she's attracted to him. And they get together really early too, which I liked in a romance. And it's just a story of them navigating their relationship. But there's that added layer of beauty standards within it. But it's really cute.
I think I like when I can match either a cartoon I've seen on TV to an art style in a graphic novel. Like I've seen the Steven Universe art style. One example was Dead India. I haven't read it, but I've seen it on the shelf. And I'm like, oh, that looks like Steven Universe. I might be interested in reading that. Like the round features, different body types. I like cute. It really depends on what the genre of the book is. So horror, you want, if there's monsters, I want them to be grotesque and kind of interesting looking. If it's something cute and artsy, like round features, pastels. But I like being able to connect it to like a cartoon that I know or something that I know. But usually I gravitate to cutesy stuff. When I was thinking of all body types, I was thinking of Moonstruck. Don't know if anybody's read that, but
I love it.
The main character is a plus size Latinx werewolf. And I just think that's so adorable. And it's slice of life, barista werewolf at a coffee shop. And it's in a world where there's other creatures that come in, and her friends are like a Medusa, or she has a girlfriend that's a werewolf. There's a fairy frat party that they end up going to, and it's a cute little slice of life, but also not slice of life because there's supernatural creatures hanging out all over the place.
That sounds really cute. Just thinking about what you said about recognizing a style from a cartoon, there's a graphic novel called Bug Boys. It's a middle grade graphic novel. And I remember looking at it and being like, that reminds me of Adventure Time. And I looked it up and I think the illustrator did work on Adventure Time.
Yeah,
So
I think they like branch off too into like graphic novels. Molly Ostertag wrote for Owl House, and she's a graphic
I love Owl
novel.
House. I cried
Uh,
during the finale of Owl House. I was inconsolable.
But I do like Molly Ostertag's.
Chris, you
She
have to
needed the
watch
girl
Owl
to see.
House. With your purpley hair, you kind of look like Amity right now.
Do.
I got recently Nimona. One of my teammates was like, you remind me of Nimona, which I was like,
Another good graphic novel.
yeah, I was like, let me book talk
They're
Nimona's like
married in real life. The two,
oh
Molly
my God.
and Dee Stevenson, are married.
Amazing, did not know that, but I was just like, let me tell you all like the great stuff about like ND Stevenson and like how cool their things are, because I like their style too of like they're sharper. I feel like they have corners, if that makes sense. And they're like in their lines and in their drawings, they have like round, but there's also like a kind of a blend. It's not like super bubbly cartoony.
Their style reminds me of Adventure Time
Yeah.
a little bit.
I like their stuff. Like I loved Lumberjanes. And I probably talked about it in the last podcast. Nimona got a movie adaptation. It was free on YouTube for like a few days. That way everyone could watch it. It was like crazy. I was like, you're on Netflix. How are you also free? Okay, I'm not gonna look into this and question it, but like I feel like that people were then like my teammate was like, I didn't know that was a graphic novel. I'm like, let me tell you more.
That's so cool. I actually had thought of another question. What is a book that you think would be really cool adapted into a graphic novel?
Ooh.
Woohoo.
Any book in the universe.
Oh, I just read one recently, The Colliding Worlds of Mina Lee. The main character is in the process of writing a webtoon. And like spoilers, she ends up getting sucked into her own webtoon.
Fun.
The webtoon is kind of like an X-Men style. There's like a school of people with different powers, but it's like a secret school. So she has to figure out how to get out of her own webtoon.
That sounds so cool. Wait, this is not a graphic novel.
It's not a graphic novel.
It sounds like a graphic
It
novel.
feels like it should be.
That's why I was like, this should be a graphic novel, because it kind of already has those aspects. And when she gets sucked in with her iPad, which she draws her graphic novel on. And she ends up being able to create stuff by drawing things on her iPad that come alive in real life.
Oh, that would be
like
so
objects and
cool.
stuff. So she can draw her clothes and
God,
like it's there and on the hanger. She draws like
this
a little robot to help her.
this sounds so cool. Wait, is this like a YA sci-fi?
It's a YA sci-fi, yeah.
The Colliding Worlds of Mina Lee, you said?
Yes,
That sounds
by
so
Ellen
cool.
Ellen O. It's also a romance.
I love a romance. I'm definitely gonna read that one. That sounds so cool. It's very like genre bendy or very like a meta. I love like a meta book.
So
If I
the author
sorry.
said she was inspired by Aha's Take on Me music video, which kind of also has graphic novel-esque things in it. So
Cool. If I could pick a book, this is I'm sure there's many I would pick, but I the first thing that I thought of was the middle grade novel Inkheart, which is one of my favorite books of all time.
that has to be a graphic novel. Now,
If it is, I haven't seen it. Well, because it's sort of like a classic of children's literature, but it's just so magical and like a book about books and about storytelling and characters come out of fairy tale books and stuff. So I just think there's potential for it to be like really richly illustrated.
Ooh, so I have like two. And Hell Followed With Us, which
Ooh.
which I've
yes.
talked about in other podcasts as well,
Mhm.
because the description of our protagonist's transformation and like the body horror, I'm just picturing it having Junji Ito do it,
Oh,
of like, because it's so like,
Junji Ito is too much
oh,
sometimes,
I love
man.
Junji, I love him. It's yeah, and he's dark. I feel like he specifically would do a really good job of like how unsettling and dark the transformation is for a protagonist, and like upsetting, but then like maybe like pair him with like somebody else, because like there are lighthearted things of like our protagonist like talking to the cute boy and like nicer things, because like his stuff is pretty, even though it's like happier, is like pretty stylized dark, so like maybe a
Mhm.
partnership
I feel like the cover of that,
is
like
so pretty too.
whoever did the cover of And Hell Followed With Us, make a graphic novel
Oh, yeah, like also that illustrator could just
of
do it as
anything.
well. But I'm just like picturing like
Yeah.
the gross Junji Ito, like his stuff
I
just feels like it has texture, and that the texture is
yeah.
upsetting what he draws. Of like, I don't like
Yeah.
it. Perfect.
Didn't he invent the page turning jump scare? I feel like he like is really famous for you turn the page jump
It's like,
scare.
oh, he has some good ones.
I've only read Uzumaki, the spiral one, but only like the first volume. I haven't finished it. And then my younger sibling is like obsessed with Tomie to the point where I was at Barnes& and Noble and I saw this like little Tomie plushie in the manga section. It was terrifying looking because she looks really scary, and I got that for their birthday. I
So
also
that
was just thinking Laini Taylor. Have you guys read Laini Taylor?
what titles?
She has a
Daughter of
trilogy.
Smoke and
Daughter of
Bone.
Smoke and Bone is one trilogy, and
Oh,
then
okay,
she has
that one.
a duology called Strange the Dreamer. Both are great. I'm obsessed. She's like one of my favorite YA authors. Also, I always say like she was like one of the first people to use the title sequence blank of blank and blank. That became really popular for a while, but she did it first.
Yes.
She has this novel called Lips Touch Three Times, which is a collection of three
I love
stories.
that one.
Yeah, that's her, and I think her husband illustrated it. So I think he should illustrate more of her books, really.
I'm gonna go in with our obsession summer, and every single Holly Black book should be a graphic novel.
I think she has a new graphic novel. I think it's called
She wrote Lucifer, like a retell, like a graphic novel, but I want her books as graphic novels.
I want them as graphic novels, but I want them super detailed. Like,
or
I
we
don't
could
want this like empty background situation. Also, I feel
we
like I'm gonna be
should
like judgy about it, because the Tithe series is set right up the road. Like, I've been
yeah,
to all the
Yes,
places in it, so I'm gonna be like,
we should
I
you
want
have
to
to
be
go
able
on
to
petition
see it.
we should petition Tony DiSerlisi, who illustrated the Spiderwick books, to do I don't know if he's ever done a full graphic novel.
She
Usually he just
she did the
writes.
Good Neighbors, I
Yes, that was
believe.
it. That was recent, but we should get Tony DiSerlisi to illustrate all of Tithe or Cruel Prince or something
Little
because he did the
Friends.
Spiderwicks. And I think he has his own books. Like he has The Search for Wandla. They're partially illustrated. They're not full graphic novels, but I think he could. And I really like his style, and I think it suits Holly Black really well.
well, he started originally, he was one of the artists for Magic the Gathering cards.
Interesting.
That style for Holly Black books would be amazing. And I have a few of like because my friends play Magic the Gathering. So like I just go through and pull out all of his cards as they're playing, and they're like, "You're messing up the deck," and I'm like, "Doesn't matter."
You're looking for Tony DiTerlizzi.
Oh, I'm looking for him, and I'm looking for Brahm, my two authors.
Oh, Brahm. Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah,
haven't read him, but I want to.
They are fun. They're detailed heavy, the way Magic the Gathering cards are heavy, detailed. So I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. His early stuff is like, they're like the illustrated Harry Potters, where it's like every page is like full page text and illustration. And then the newer stuff is very purple prose, detailed text. And then like each chapter start has like an illustration and then like a chunk of illustrations in the middle.
Speaking of Lucifer, the graphic novel that you were talking about before, have you guys seen the show, Lucifer, the adaptation?
The one with, I was going to say the hot guy, that doesn't help.
Tom something.
Tom
He is a
something.
hot guy. His name is Tom something, but and most people know this, but I just find it really charming when there's little references within stuff like that. So Lucifer, the comic series, started out, which you may or may not know. I don't want to be like Summer explaining it to you. It was a storyline in one of the first Sandman books that Lucifer decides to leave hell and he gives Morpheus the key, and then Morpheus like passes it along to somebody else. And later you see him in a piano bar somewhere. But then I guess another author picked up that storyline and got permission from Neil Gaiman to expand it. So in Lucifer, the TV show, there are little Neil Gaiman references like throughout. Like at one point, I think Chloe, the detective, is like reading her daughter Coraline before bed, which I just thought was a really charming little nudge, you know? All right, do we want to have any new releases we want to promote?
I have a couple. I just read Gatheist. That also ties in with like the interesting art style. Because like I was like and like so annoyed of like, why didn't you tell me like what format you use for your art style? That one's a nonfiction graphic novel biography memoir about the author who now I didn't write down the author on only that one.
Wait, what's the title?
Gatheist.
Gay, oh, like atheist, but
Yeah.
gay.
Yeah, gay atheist.
A gay
Gatheist.
atheist. Okay.
But it was about growing up in the Jewish Orthodox culture and then coming to terms with being gay and leaving the religion.
Wow.
Heavy, but the art style was interesting. And that's part of why I was like, ooh, new book, new graphic novel. And then also like the art style, it looks like colored pencil.
Ooh.
But like a digital colored pencil. So I was like trying like reading through, like pulling up the website. I'm like, tell me about the art style, because the author and his partner wrote and illustrated it together. Really enjoyed that because it goes into the Orthodox religion and the culture. It's his memoir, so it's set during the 90s and like also like what it was like to be gay in the 90s and then like in the Orthodox culture.
A lot of layers.
Like a lot of layers in that. And like it's really like just pretty art style, but like color pencils, it's like muted coloring wise. But when it has like the yellows for like when it's happy and like optimistic, like those yellows feel really bright and pops. So I really like also the art in that one too.
I'm going to talk about three. Two of them I haven't read fully, but I'm really excited. Robin Ha's new book. Robin Ha wrote Almost an American Girl, which was her memoir of growing up as a Korean American and being into graphic novels. Her new book is a queer feminist retelling of the Fox Maiden legend from Korean mythology. It's called The Fox Maidens. Yeah, I'm just really excited because I haven't seen anything from her, and I really enjoyed her art style, which was sort of realistic, and I'm interested to see what a queer feminist graphic novel fantasy of hers looks like, since her last one was a memoir. The other one is Brooms by Jasmine Walls, illustrated by Tio Duval. It's set in the 1930s Mississippi, where magic is permitted only on certain circumstances and by certain people, and unsanctioned, as you guessed from the title. Broom riding is banned. So the main characters are trying to compete in this unsanctioned broom riding in order to get permission to do magic. And it's full of diverse characters, indigenous people, people from all different backgrounds. And then the one I just started reading, the art style reminds me of Has Been Hotel, because it has the people with the big eyes, the big hair, and bright colors. It's called Total Party Killers. It is D&D mixed with Quentin Tarantino movies, so it's very bloody. The main character, Verity, is an adventuring intern. So she's level 1, doesn't have a class, if you know what any of these terms are in relation to D&D. And she ends up in this party and mayhem and havoc ensue. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
I just read Bunt Striking Out on Financial Aid by Nyozi Uzaku. She wrote Check Please, which I talked about in our
yes,
one from 2 years ago. Okay, yeah, I was like, did not look at the author. I just went, yes, give me the one about sports and financial aid. Perfect. This definitely won't be stressful. And then I was like, I know this art style. And then I was like, oh, maybe actually look at who wrote it. And the protagonist gets into the local art school and they mess up her scholarship. So she forms a softball team with her best friend who had dropped out because he didn't agree with the ethics of the school the year before to get a scholarship. Because if you win one game as a sports team on a technicality, you can get a scholarship. It's this band of misfit art kids working together to be on a softball team where one girl's super into softball, this is their thing. You see that in the background, her family is either Amish or Mennonite. They have the horse and buggy. She does woodworking and furniture building. It's all gorgeous. There's the fashion designer girl who's trying to get her own financial aid so she doesn't rely on her rich parents and have them controlling all of her artistic decisions. One girl that is really into sports and seems to have real intense beef with the school. And it's a super senior, so it's super fun seeing all these people. One of the girls is always in the background illustrating things, and you see the best friend, he'll look over and then just nope, just turns and walks away, not dealing with whatever you're drawing right now. So it's it's fun and lighthearted, but also her desperately trying to get her financial aid to stay in college, and also dealing with sometimes the college that you thought was your dream college is not what you expected it to be at all. So I did really enjoy that one. It was fun. And my issue with Check Please, because it started off as a webcomic, and then when they transferred it over, some of the stuff that had been intermixed in it, where it was graphic novel and then text between characters, were two separate chunks instead of interfiled. So you're only getting part of the story, and then the more in-depth character building was after you had already read everything. This was cohesively fully just had been a graphic novel, intended to be a graphic novel, so it flowed. It didn't have that weird split thing happening. And that one we don't have physically, but we have a ton of graphic novels on Hoopla and Libby, our digital platforms. So always check those out too, because sometimes we'll have manga that's the first of the series that we haven't gotten physically as a does our audience like these? Is the community interested? So definitely check those, because if we see that things are getting read, we're oh, okay, there's definitely an interest
consider
in it.
buying them.
Yeah, there's a lot of manga on Libby, and there's a lot of comics on Hoopla. I read almost all the Hellboys on Hoopla because, again, if you're going to Barnes and Noble to buy a comic, one comic is $15, and you're going to read it in a day. So it can be an expensive hobby. There's a lot at the library that you can get.
You could binge series that are complete on Hoopla.
Yeah, I read all of Bizengast a few years ago because I was
I
remember Bizengast.
I reread that recently, Chris. Did you notice that the 8th book, you can't get it anywhere?
No.
We have up to book 7.
Yeah, we only had to book 7, and I just didn't look further. I was I guess we don't have 8, and
then
just
book
didn't
8,
investigate.
I had to buy on Kindle, but it was worth it to know how it ended, because I read the series as a kid and I've reread it multiple times, but I never knew how it ended. I also love Bizengast, which I feel like no one knows what Bizengast is.
I remember I had been reading it, and I was at Anime Next up in Somerset, and there was a woman in the full ball gown with all the skeleton bones on it in the middle of July in New Jersey, where it's awful and humid, and she's walking around so nice and taking pictures, and I'm I am sweating in my black dress. And this woman is wearing layers and plastic bones. It was amazing.
When was this?
I want to say 2010, 2010. I was in college.
I remember reading them when I was, a kid. They had them at the Point Pleasant Beach Library, the hard copies. And I read them there. And then I reread them on Hoopla as an adult. And I feel like it's almost lost media because I don't know anyone else who's read them other than you, but they're so good. And like the art style is so beautiful
Rich. Yeah,
and goth, but elegant. It's so good. It's like has an imprint in my brain because I read it really young.
that's another thing where like the art style matches the story, and like
Mhm.
for that one especially, like if the art style wasn't so like rich and detailed.
Yes, interestingly enough, so it is technically a manga, but it's an American manga. So it is not written back to front.
Yeah.
However, on Hoopla, it considers it a manga. So you get the little pop-up telling you you have to read this back to front, but you don't. So you actually have to like take the little scrolly bubble and move it to the front again, just so you can read it in front to back.
It used to know it was front to back, like normal American style.
I don't know. Maybe it's just a glitch. Maybe they've corrected it already. Thank you guys for joining us for Waves of YA once again. Our next episode will be entitled Spooky Reads, just in time for Halloween or any time of the year. Be sure to check us out. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to check out the Ocean County Library's website for more podcasts and events. All titles mentioned in today's episode can be found through the Ocean County Library, free with your library card. Until next time, happy reading.